Welcome back. Now, it's a battle that started more than 3 years ago. The battle to improve the standard of living of Nigerian workers by reviewing the minimum wage, which has been pegged at 18,000 naira for more than 7 years now. Now, after months of negotiations, agreements, disagreements, strike actions, and several back and forth, both parties have now reached a comfortable point of agreement. The tripartite committee set up by the federal government, which includes, of course, the Labour and Employers Consultative Forum, agreed to a new minimum wage of 30,000 naira for Nigerian workers. In dollar terms, that's around $83 based on the parallel market exchange rate. But based on the official exchange rate of 305 naira to the dollar, it's around $98.4 actually. So the report was submitted to President Muhammadu Buhari November 6th, the same day the labor unions had scheduled to commence their indefinite strike action. Take a listen to the Nigerian president and also the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress speak after the report was submitted.
We knew the committee had a difficult task ahead of it. But at the same time, we were also confident that the patriotic and professional background of its members would produce realistic, fair, and implementable recommendations that can be considered by both the executive and legislative arms of government. I am not surprised that the committee has worked for close to 1 year. I am also not surprised that on a few occasions the debate got heated and sometimes these differences came out open. What is truly inspiring is that in almost all instances of disagreements, the committee members always came back to the negotiating table with a common goal of improving the welfare of Nigerian workers. On behalf of all Nigerians today, I want to thank you this. I have been receiving regular updates on your deliberations. And today, I am pleased that you have completed your work in a peaceful and non-controversial manner. The entire nation is grateful to you.
Having worked assiduously for nearly 1 year on this very important issue that affects the life of every working family, we thought, I think it's appropriate for this report to be submitted to Mr. President, and I think we have fulfilled all righteousness by making sure that the report is submitted. And as President has promised, giving it accelerated consideration will also help extremely to make sure that something comes to the pocket of Nigerian worker to actually address the challenges of especially the challenges in the economy that have also affected the workers. If you recall also, the 2011 minimum wage review was almost at the same period. And therefore, the timeline was a cycle of 5 years. And therefore, it's a coincidence that it happened at this point in time. And therefore, at whatever time the minimum wage is due, we have a responsibility to make sure that the interest of the working class is represented.
Now, the report is already generating reactions. Despite the agreement, some state governors have expressed their reservation, saying they will find it difficult to pay. Analysts and economists have also shared the same concern over whether some state governments will be able to pay if or when the new minimum wage eventually becomes law. At present, a number of states are still owing arrears of unpaid salaries. In May 2016, Nigeria's former Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, announced that 165 billion naira monthly wage bill for about 90,000 federal civil servants was not sustainable. Same thing applied to many states. A lot of governors are groaning under the yoke of heavy salary burden. Yet, the number of civil servants continue to grow. Most of the states are also paying back huge local and foreign debts, which makes, of course, monthly federal allocation insufficient to meet their wage bill. For example, Taraba State has 14,000 workers in its service with an estimated wage bill of 4.4 billion naira monthly. In October, after all deductions were made, Taraba State was left with 2.3 billion naira, not even enough to meet the 4.4 billion naira wage bill. Osun State, in the southwest of the country, its wage bill for workers is estimated at about 3.7 billion naira monthly. But in October 2018, the state got 305 million naira allocation after deductions, of course, for debts owed for that month. Ekiti State, also in the southwest, monthly wage bill is estimated at 2.6 billion naira, but the state got 1.6 billion naira in the month of October 2018. Jigawa State in the north of the country, with a workforce of 61,000, has an estimated wage bill of 3.4 or 3.8 billion naira, but got 3.1 billion naira from the federal allocation in October. Most of the states generate very meager internal revenue, which of course cannot meet up with other government expenses. Yet state governments have to provide infrastructure like build roads, provide water, build schools, and other developmental projects. This picture clearly portrays a situation that is not only difficult for state governments, but near impossible. So if and when the 30,000 naira minimum wage bill is eventually approved by the National Assembly, the questions are, can state governments in truth afford to pay? Will reducing the workforce be an option? And what exactly can states do to meet up with the huge workers' salary? How long can the federal government continue to give bailouts to states? Joining me now to look at these issues is economist Michael Famoroti. Michael, thank you very much for joining us on the program. First off, let me ask you what exactly the implication is, especially for the Nigerian economy and, of course, government revenue or government budget, if you like, of this 30,000 naira minimum wage.
Well, the precise quantitative implication is unclear. What we do know for certain is that it's going to be extremely difficult for the Nigerian government to absorb the increase in the minimum wage, right? So looking at government finances at the moment, personnel costs, so salaries and wages, are already consuming up to 70% of Nigeria's revenues, right? That is with a minimum wage of 18,500 naira. When you almost double that, then you're possibly looking at personnel costs higher than revenues. That essentially means that Nigeria may need to borrow to pay for this wage increase. That is the reality that we have to face if revenues do not pick up significantly. And from the last couple of years, there is no sign that revenues are going to, substantially increase over the next year or so.
And of course, when you're talking about this revenue now, you're just looking at the revenue of the federal government. But let's talk about the states, because, this is not just about the central government alone. 36 states are involved. You look at the 36 states, you think they're up to it?
No. One of the real issues with the minimum wage, or the national minimum wage, is that it is a national minimum wage. Nigerian states are too diverse to have the same minimum wage. You could argue that perhaps states in the southwest are close enough, but then when you start comparing Lagos to the likes of Borno, it makes little sense to have a single wage, and it's a recipe for disaster. Right? We know also that the balance sheets of the states vary significantly, and amid that, it's obvious that a number of states who already owe salaries will not be able to afford again to pay for this wage increase. And again, that's one of the things that frustrates me about the wage increase, because what we were hoping for at the very least was a situation where different states could have different minimum wages. That would have been a more sensible resolution to this national minimum wage effect.
But how could the government have dealt with that when Labour was not even willing to compromise on that issue? Labour kept insisting it wants a national minimum wage and that the wage was going to apply to all the states of the country.
Well, that's a political point, if anything, and I admit that it's tough. But the reality is that from an economic perspective, it makes no sense having a a single wage. And whatever needed to have been done to assuage labor's concerns ought to have been. So I look at that 30,000 naira and I look at Lagos, for example, and it's still not enough. I look at other states and you could argue for, how far that money could go. But the reality is, at the federal level, we can barely afford to pay for the wage increase, if at all. And at the state level, a number of states are going to struggle significantly because they are already struggling to pay for current wages and overheads. And a number of them are restricted from borrowing in one way or another. And the outcome of this is going to be more salaries being owed. And that's something that the labor unions of those states would have to deal with, unfortunately.
So, something I have to ask you, just maybe, let me just put forward this argument now, and I want to get your thoughts on it. You look at the various states of the country, of course you talked about Lagos, but you look at the cost of living in the various states of the country. They basically cannot be the same. It's cheaper, for instance, to live in some states than others. Take Lagos, for instance, quite expensive to live in, but it definitely would be cheaper, say in a state like Borno, Zamfara, and all of that states. And so would it then be, would it make for any compelling reasoning now that all these states, the workers in these states now earn the same salaries?
Well, precisely, just like I said, it makes little sense to have a national wage. What you can do is enact a national wage floor and then allow or coerce states to set varying wages above that floor. So perhaps in Lagos, you could have a minimum wage as high as 50,000, and then in Borno, you have one maybe at 31,000, right? That is a more fiscally responsible and also economically sensible decision. Unfortunately, we have taken the route of a national wage that is too little for some and for others just enough.
Talking about the central government now, especially the federal government's budget, what exactly would this mean now for the capital side of the budget, talking about capital projects? Because we know this government has been trying to maintain a balance between recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. For the past 2 or 3 budgets now, it has been able to achieve that 70-30 balance. But do you see that being achieved in the next budget cycle in 2019?
Well, the reality is actually very different because whilst the budget has stipulated a 70-30 split, actual expenditure has been tilted a lot more towards recurrent expenditure. So generally, over the last couple of years, the government has always hit its debt servicing targets, and it's always hit its overhead and personnel costs as well. Sometimes it has actually spent more than budgeted on each of those areas. But for capital expenditure, it has consistently underperformed. And generally, we have seen at most a 70% implementation of the capital budget. So in reality, we are already underspending on capex. Plus, even that capex, we effectively are borrowing every single naira that is dedicated to capex because all revenues attained by the federal government are either used to pay for salaries or to service debt. Right? So we are actually already in a situation where every naira used on capex is a loan. And obviously, as soon as you increase personnel costs, that puts even more pressure on existing revenue, so nothing is going to change. We're still going to be borrowing to fund capex, and the worry now is that borrowing may also be diverted to pay salaries or to pay off existing debts, and that can create a real fiscal crisis.
I think the government can do to actually boost its revenue, between now and say when this is implemented, the new national minimum wage now? Is there any magic wand, that the government could use now to turn around its revenue and say boost the revenue by, let's just say, even by 25 to 30%?
Officially, no. There's no magic wand. There are long-term solutions like passing the various elements of the petroleum industry bill. That's going to drive capital expenditure and investments in the oil and gas space, and eventually oil exports will go up. The other thing, of course, which may be a short-term balm, is to scrap the subsidy stroke on the recovery program, right? Because those funds that are being diverted to fund the pump price of petrol being artificially low can be used, or at least can be partly used, to fund the increase in the minimum wage. Now, the irony of that is that if that is a choice taking, then you are basically taking from one hand and giving to the other hand, because the same people that are getting the wage increase are the same people that are now going to be paying more for petrol. But that is the only quick win we have, because we have tried to raise non-oil revenues, and so far progress has been very slow.
Don't you think that may happen?
I think that's possible, but I don't think it's going to happen before the elections. I think just as how the minimum wage increase is a political balm for them, intentional or not, a fuel price hike would be the opposite. And although we are hoping that this wage increase is eventually going to lead to deregulation of petroleum, of power as well, it's unlikely to happen before the elections.
And you don't see a situation where some state governments now might be forced to sort of cut down on their workforce?
Oh, that would be interesting. I think some states will. It will likely depend more on political factors, such as how strong the unions are in those states, whether the governor is seeking re-election, how strong the fiscal position of those states are. But I do think that for some states, that is going to be the only option they have, and it's going to be an option that they do explore.
Let me ask you a pointed question now. If you were the president of this country and you were confronted by the labor unions the way they confronted the government, and then they put forward this compelling case that, look, whether you like it or not, 18,000 naira minimum wage is no longer feasible. It's just not sustainable, not feasible, given the fact that we've had series of devaluations and what have you. If you were confronted by the labor unions with all of these facts, and then they're mounting pressure on you, what would you do?
Okay, I'll just take a step back actually, because this issue of minimum wage has been ongoing for a long time, but if anything was preempted by a quasi-promise that this administration made at the end of last year. So they almost set themselves up by considering the issue at all, because it has come up oftentimes in previous years but has been quickly quashed, right? Because there has no fiscal room to entertain the thoughts. Now, having set myself up for a potential wage hike, the only option on the table is twofold. One, states would have to have different minimum wages, and two, that minimum wage increase will be tied to deregulation of PMS and of electricity tariffs, right? To ensure that all the funds that are being sucked up by these quasi-subsidy programs are freed up to fund the wage increase, and then we are able to also move towards a market-based system in these different industries.
Do you think, it's a final question now, do you think with what we're seeing now, do you see the government, say the National Assembly now concluding work? Of course, the president still has to send an executive bill to the National Assembly, but do you see this government, the current government, concluding work on the national minimum wage and going ahead to implement it before the elections in 2019?
Actually, I don't know. That's a tough one because you then begin to wade into extremely political territory. Obviously, we know the makeup of the Senate. We know the clashes that the executive and the legislature have had over the last couple of years. So it's difficult to predict how the National Assembly will receive the president's bill. and what they will make of it, right? So I am actually at a loss to determine that, but I do think that for the presidency, even the agreement alone to push for the wage increase is a political point, and perhaps the National Assembly would not want to incur the wrath of the labor unions by stalling the bill.
You're right. We just wait and see where the governments of these various states now, including the federal government, will get the money to pay. But the labor unions are pretty confident that the governments can pay, that all they just need to do is just to probably cut down on the cost of governance. They just think that, by cutting down on the cost of governance, then these governors will be able to save enough to pay for these salaries. Do you share that view?
Adamantly, no. Nigeria cannot afford this wage increase. Flat out, no.
All right. Michael Famaroti, thank you very much for joining us. Well, that's it on the program. If you want to watch it again, it's just simple. Go to our website, tv360nigeria.com. You'll find this program and lots more there. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/TV360Nigeria. You can as well join us on Google+. It's at TV360Nigeria, or like us on Facebook. The address is facebook.com/TV360Nigeria. Do also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is at TV360Nigeria. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week.